Hello, welcome to a how to draw video. Today we're going to be learning how to draw a snake. I'm not really sure what kind of snake this is. I just found it on Google and I thought the body pose was pretty nice. So the first thing I would suggest doing is start with the overall shapes. If you could look for the shapes in between whenever it has a quilled position like that, that'll actually help out the most I've found. But it's kind of up to you how you want to start it. So I'm going to start personally by drawing this shape in the middle. I'm going to draw about mid where I'm going to put my drawing. So I'm going to start off with just kind of sort of a frowny face. And then this is kind of sort of making a parenthesis with a backwards parenthesis. So it's like an S curve here. So I'm going to take this corner. I'm going to turn this into a parenthesis or like the letter C, but don't make it go too far. And then I'm going to curve it backwards in this direction. So it kind of makes like a really long stretched out S that curves like this. Then what I'm going to do, so I already have this shape drawn here. So then what I'm going to do is we're going to do a really big, kind of like a frown or a parenthesis here. And then it's going to do a very small curve with a smiley face going back and touching that corner. So I'm going to start at the corner here. Make sure that this is further forward than this is. You don't want this to be below here, otherwise it'll look weird. So I'm going to start here. I'm going to do first a big kind of like a frowny face or a big parenthesis. Once I get about across from here, then I'm going to start curving it opposite. So I'm going to curve it towards this corner like this so that I get kind of like another stretched out S, but it's really long and curvy. So now I've established this shape. So what I'm actually going to do now, before I draw this shape, I want to go ahead and draw this curve right here. So to start, I'm going to start at the corner. And then I'm going to draw a frowny face like this. So it's going to curve down into a frown. And then my goal is that I want it to kind of curve back up. So I see right here where it starts and then it curves all the way around and then it kind of almost wants to continue where it started. But notice that there's a gap here. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to first, before I continue this, I'm going to move down however thick I want that part of the tail. I'm going to put a placer dot. Whenever you're first learning how to draw, this is really helpful so you don't go too far. So now that I have my placer dot in place, I'm going to connect these two areas with a really big curve. So I want to make sure that I go kind of like a really big exaggerated smile like this so that it gets that curvature. So I'm just going to aim at this one. It's okay if it's not perfect. I'm just going to do a really big smiley face that just curves all the way back up to that area. It's okay if it doesn't land quite on the dot. You don't have to draw it like perfectly straight. It's actually more natural if it's not perfect. All right, now that I got that bottom part, now I'm actually going to close this. So here's where I just stopped. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a frowny face until it gets about middle, sharp smile, and then connect. That way it's going to jump over to the other part of the body. So I'm going to start here, do an exaggerated frowny face. My goal is to make almost like a teardrop. So now that I get to the center, keep this kind of about the same-ish distance for the body. Once I get to here, I'm going to draw kind of like a teardrop like this. So it kind of like a really big smile touch back on itself. Okay, so now that I got that, I got this part of the tail done. So I've got to go, I would suggest go ahead and draw this part. I really don't like the composition of this here. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to curve it back over here, but it's up to you where you want to end the tail. You can even like curve it out here if you want to. But in order to end the tail, here I have these two lines right here and here. This is going to be my tail lines. If it helps, go ahead on this section right here, extend it like this so that it gets even with this one. And then here's where you get to determine where the end of your tail is. So I'm just going to curve mine. I like this right here. I'm just going to curve mine inwards a little bit so that it ends a little sooner rather than later. And then all I'm going to do is add a frown at the tip like this, so that it's not super, super pointy, but it's still small. And then my goal is that I want to connect this corner and then go all the way and connect it to here. I'm going to gradually and very slowly follow my previous curve and then allow it to slowly get wide enough so that I can connect it here. Once again, this part right here, you can do as much as you want to. You can have it curving down, you can have it curving further up. It's up to you. It's just nice to kind of have a finished part of the tail. So now what we're going to do is we're going to draw the snake backwards. So now that we've established these body coils, I'm going to start, this is the tail, it flows in this direction, and then it goes to here. We already have the inner part of the body drawn. Now we're going to draw that outer part. So you can see here where it kind of looks like it continues on the other side. I'm going to start here, and then I'm going to also do the same thing is I'm going to continue it on this other side. But in order to make sure that I don't get too far off, I am going to put a placer mark. So right here in the picture, I see that there's another teardrop shape. So if it helps, go ahead and draw just the teardrop shape. Don't worry about any of these other curves. So I see that the teardrop shape is right across from where I have that backwards parenthesis right here. So I'm going to go right across from that and then going to go ahead and draw that teardrop. So here's my backwards parenthesis. Mine's going to end up covering part of my tail. That's totally fine. It's okay. You're just going to go across from this curve right here. Go across from it. I'm going to mimic that curve kind of in this area. I'm going to make it somewhat pointier at the top. So it looks kind of like a little teardrop. So all I'm going to do is it's literally just a smiley face with kind of like a triangle on top to draw a teardrop shape. And it's okay if it's not perfect. And if I don't like that later, I can always erase it and fix it. So now that I've established my teardrop shape, now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and connect here all the way over here to across from wherever I stopped on this teardrop. So I'm actually going to go ahead and go across from this teardrop, put a little marker dot. So now my goal is to connect this dot to this dot with a big curve. So I can see that it kind of goes up a little bit and then it goes relatively flattish where it does a gradual frown and then a sharper frown as it gets closer. So I'm going to first go up and then I'm going to go over. Keep in mind, you want to keep this pretty consistent, this distance between these. So I'm just going to go over, keep it kind of flattish, doing a very small frown. And then my goal is to connect it over here. So I'm just going to exaggerate that frown so it connects back over to there. So now that I have my body fully connected, now I can move on to getting closer to the harder part, which is going to be that face area. So I've already got my body coiled here. So tail, body, body, body. And then this part right here, we're going to have another curve where the head's going to go. Me personally, if I have something complicated like this, I like to draw the head first and then connect the rest of the body back together. So I'm going to look. My head is right across from the top of that teardrop. So I'm going to very lightly kind of sketch out a line going across. You can just visualize that if you don't want to draw it, but I like to have some guidelines there. And then I'm going to measure the size of that head. I'm just using my fingers like this. The size of that head is about the same size as the body down here. So if I measure that, I should be able to fit that head somewhere in that body-ish shape. So I'm going to kind of estimate how big I need to make that head. And then I'm going to draw just a very simple shape. It's got kind of like a frowny face, smiley face, almost kind of like an eye shape or like a lemon wedge shape. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to go across from the teardrop. I'm going to give it a little bit of a gap. And then I'm going to draw kind of like that little frowny face. However big you want the head. Don't make it too big, otherwise it'll look a little weird and cartoony, unless that's what you're going for. I'm going to do like a little smiley face. So frowny face, smiley face to connect it together. Kind of like this, so that we get like a little head shape. And now I'm going to come back later and do the details on the head shape. I just want to get that head shape done. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect it together to the rest of the body. So once again, we have this teardrop, but now I see that the teardrop, this part is overlapping the other part of the body. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a curve like this. So it kind of overlaps. You can make it go on top of the other part if you want to. Just don't forget to erase the other half of the body. And then I see that this is going to frown down until, if I look at it, this is about a third of the head. So I'm going to frown that down until it touches about a third on my head shape. So I'm going to figure out where about a third is. I'm going to say it's about here-ish. And then my goal is to connect that point to this point. I'm just going to do that with just a really exaggerated frowny face, like this. So I have that really exaggerated frowny face connecting it together. And then I can actually see this is not touching the head physically. It just looks like it visually. I can see that the head actually goes back to here and then it starts curving. So I'm actually going to go ahead and keep this part of the head, but I can erase the center part down here. So I'm going to keep this section, but I can erase right below that line. So that determines that that's where the head is coiled up. Now, because I deleted this part of the tail, I physically would be able to see another backwards teardrop or upside down teardrop here. If you made your tail cover this part, it's okay to kind of omit that teardrop, but you do still want to get this curvature of the spine on the skeleton, the snake here. So my goal is that I want to make, first I'm going to start the bottom of the head here. I'm going to try to follow this curve right here. So I'm going to kind of curve up, and then this is where I would get my teardrop. like this because my neck is now turning inwards. And I would just turn back until it touches the bottom of the head, kind of like this. And then my goal is that I want this to curve and go across from this part of the body. So my goal is to connect this part to across from where the body is here. I'm going to do that with a smile or a curve that is facing towards this way. So I'm just going to do kind of like a little parenthesis or a little smiley face and connect that together. So we get this kind of sort of squirrely little snake thing. All right, now we're ready for the last part. That's going to be the facial structure. So I'm just going to zoom in a little bit here. All right, so the first thing I want to do is I want to kind of refine the face shape. I see that this is kind of sort of like a diagonal line. It keeps that kind of circular shape, but this does have kind of sort of a diagonal line with a little bump right here. So I want to kind of erase and exaggerate this particular part, or I can just simply draw over it and then erase it like this, so that I have kind of sort of more of a angled head shape. It's kind of up to you how detailed you want to go for that. But I do see that there is that little eye bump, and it's going to be about a third up the face. So if this started 1/3 back, this is going to start 1/3 up. So I'm going to find that third area. I personally like to erase first whenever I do these tiny details because it's a little easier than having to erase it later, because sometimes you erase the thing you draw. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a frowny face connecting these two. So just a little frown like this. So that gets that eye bump area. Now, a diagonal from this is where we're going to find that eye. So I'm going to very lightly sketch a diagonal line so that I can make sure my eyes are in line. And then about a third up from the bottom of the head, that's where I'm going to have my eye shape. Now, this one's eye is fairly round. It does have a little bit of a frowny smiley face vibe to it, but overall fairly round. So I'm going to find the location of my eye, which is a little bit lower than center of head. So it's going to be on this diagonal line. You don't want it directly below the eye, otherwise it'll look funny. So make sure it's a diagonal line from the bump. And then it's just going to be small frown, like this, and small smile. And if you want to add like the little eye line on there, you can as well. You can also add like little eye shinies. You can add shading or coloring or whatever. It's kind of up to you, but I'm just going to keep it a little line with a little bit of a highlight in there. All right, so it's a little hard to see, but there is a slight bulge right here where it has the eye bump, same thing as here. So just for a little detail, you can erase that guideline if you don't need it anymore. For a little detail, just right above the eye, I'm going to add a slight frown. It almost looks like you're giving him an eyebrow, which is kind of cute. All right, so the rest of this, we're almost done, is we just got a little detail. I don't know, I think that's the heat sensor, but it's basically a greater than or less than sign, and it's right there in front of the eye. So I'm just going to draw a very tiny greater than or less than sign. You can add a little bit of shading in there if you want to. And then I'm going to have to deform the face a little bit because I drew mine a little bit too close. I do see that the nose goes down first and then follows the curve. So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to first kind of erase the tip of the nose. And then I'm going to go down first. And then I'm going to go across. That way it gets a little bit more of a snake head shape instead of just like an eyeball shape. And then from here, the last thing I see for a detail is I see that the mouth is kind of like a very tiny frown, and then it's a line following down to the crack. And this crack ends right below where the eye starts. So I'm going to go ahead and put a marker dot, go right below the eye location. I'm just going to put like a tiny, tiny dot really close to the bottom of the mouth. And then what I'm going to do is right here at the tip, in the middle-ish of that straight line, I'm going to draw a really tiny frowny face, And then my goal is just to connect this line to this line, following really closely to the bottom of that mouth since we're at a lower or a higher angle. And then that's pretty much it. I got a little snaky guy. You can go all out and add like a bunch of like scale details, which if you are adding scales, just make sure you're paying attention to the direction the scales are going. For example, you can see these are just smiley faces kind of going off to the side. So if I wanted to do that, I can add like little curves going off in the direction the scales are going, or you can see that there's some like larger scales and tinier scales. So like my drawing is really tiny, so I could add just like little dots or like little bitty curvy shapes to kind of add textures. Where they get larger, you can add like bigger curves if you want to. But as far as just like a rough sketch, I just like to add what I call little C shapes. It's where I'm just doing like little curvy tally marks. So you can add just like some of those. You don't have to cover the entire body. That's oftentimes is something that a lot of people kind of feel like they have to do, is cover the entire thing in texture. This is called an implied texture, just adding a little bit can go a long way and make people believe that you added a lot of texture without having to put in so much work. Obviously for a render drawing, then that can elevate it and make it look much cooler. But for just like a rough sketch, I think this is fine. Now, I do on mine personally, you may not have this problem. On mine, my tail kind of seems like it's wrapping under the body. So I'm actually going to continue that over here. Oh, excuse that. Oops. All right, I'm going to go ahead and continue that over here because it looks like the tail would continue on the other side. I'm just going to add a little bump, and that'll be the end of my tail. And then I could add like more texture and stuff over here if I wanted to, but I'm just going to leave it like that. All right, so all I'm going to do next is shade. You don't have to shade if you don't want to. I just think shading kind of helps it out a little bit, especially whenever you have something like this that has a lot of three-dimensionality to it. If you add shading, it'll make it look a little bit more interesting and make it feel more 3D. So just anywhere that the light wouldn't normally reach it or where there's an overlap, adding just a little pop of shading can make it really stand out. But yeah, so there's a little bit of extra detail in there, and that's pretty much it. So that's how you draw a little snaky guy. All right, just remember when you're drawing snakes, you want to look for shapes in between the body, and that can really help you out, especially those teardrop shapes when you're adding those overlaps. All right, I hope you had fun, and I would love to see what you got. All right, thanks. Have a good day. Bye.